Okay, good evening, everybody, and welcome back to Press Play. I'm your host, JJ48, and tonight we are going to be kind of doing a recap, or kind of our uh, debriefing of Minish Cap and Twilight Princess. So to start with, I've got our timeline here, and kind of move some things around. I think with Minish Cap, it seems to me that this is a very early game in the timeline. Uh, Mainly because there's no mention of Ganon or we still have some legends of ancient days and the Minish and the Picori blade and everything, but there's not really anything that I think ties it to previous games in the series. This I think is meant to be the first of the Four Sword games, and doesn't really seem to have any relevance to the other ones, at least as far as like them coming before it. So I've put Minish Cap first. And also, just to reiterate for anybody who's hasn't seen us do one of these before, this timeline is definitely not an official Nintendo timeline. This is not an attempt to create an official timeline. This is just us looking at the games and kind of saying, hey, how do we think they fit together? Because, of course, the games were not really meant to be. I feel like most of the games were not really meant to necessarily be directly tied to things, except where they have explicit references. So any such timeline is just kind of all fun anyway. From Minish Cap, I think Four Swords seems to be another like kind of next in the series. The link in there I don't think is the same link because, as I recall, that one references the Four Sword as being, a legend within that time. But we still don't have Ganon involved, so I think that it still makes sense to kind of have that be before Ganon really rises as a threat. Then we have Ocarina of Time, which is where we kind of ended up splitting the timeline because we had that bit of time paradox at the end of Ocarina of Time when Link, as a grown-up, defeats Ganon, but then he goes back in time to help Zelda thwart Ganon's plan and prevent him from ever coming to power, so we kind of have two timelines. Last time with Wind Waker, I think Wind Waker was the last time we did one of these. I don't know that we did one for Four Swords Adventures. But when we did that, we kind of came up with an idea of how that might lead to Wind Waker, and the Child Link one, where Ganon is prevented from ever coming to power, kind of takes its own route. One thing I think Minish Cap does help here is, last time you might recall we kind of had this branch come back to Wind Waker tentatively, mainly because while Wind Waker explicitly references the Ocarina of Time with the hero who defeated Ganon and then leapt through time and then didn't return when Ganon came back, and that's why Hyrule needed to be drowned. It also referenced Tingle, and not just by having Tingle in it, but by referencing, oh yeah, long ago there was this guy named Tingle who helped out a hero, and so that's why now on a certain island, every young man, when he comes of age at 35 or whatever, ends up dressing like Tingle, paralleling Tingle to Link, and very much explicitly referencing Tingle. So we felt that there had to be some kind of a connection. Of course, now with Minish Cap, Tingle is in Minish Cap, so we don't need a connection to the Majora's Mask side of the timeline. Instead, Majora's Mask itself, taking place afterwards, like that Tingle would also be following the tradition of the original Tingle, presumably. And so we can break the timelines apart a little bit. On this side, I decided to put Four Swords Adventures kind of after Majora's Mask, but before The Legend of Zelda. I figured that if Child Link thwarted Ganon, Ganon's still around. He hasn't been actually defeated, and so maybe that's where Ganon came from in Four Swords Adventures. Uh, we also have this leading into The Legend of Zelda because in the Minish Cap, I believe when we first reforged the Picori blade, it was called the White Sword before it became the Four Sword. The White Sword is also a sword upgrade that we can get in The Legend of Zelda. Since Ganon was sealed away at the end of Four Sword Adventures, he presumably has found some way to make it back. So that would indicate that something happened to the Four Sword, and maybe it was downgraded to the White Sword. Still pretty powerful, but no longer capable of harnessing Ganon, keeping him at bay. And then that takes us through Zelda 1 and 2. And I decided to put Twilight Princess over here for a couple reasons. First of all, let's see, we have what happened to Ganon in the history of Twilight Princess. He was sent to the Twilight Realm by the sages. So that has to fit in somewhere. And I think I was speculating that maybe after Zelda 2, remember part of the plot of that was Ganon's minions were trying to find a way to revive Ganon using Link's blood after Ganon was killed in the original Legend of Zelda. So maybe his minions actually did, after the events of the game, manage to kill Link, revive Ganon, and then now there's no Link, so the sages have to step in to actually get rid of Ganon. This might also explain why in Twilight Princess you might remember we kept encountering that skeleton hero who taught us all of the sword tricks. I think the implication seems to be that was a previous Link. If there were something like this where a previous Link was actually responsible, or like his sacrifice, he was sacrificed to bring Ganon back, that might help explain why he was still around helping us out. That like, hey, I'm can't get any rest until I actually help you defeat Ganon or something. Pure speculation, but it is kind of just a fun way to link the games together, I think. And of course, the Oracle's games, I still am not quite sure how those can fit into the timeline, or rather, it's not that they can't fit in; it's that they fit in too many places. I think the presence of so many characters that are shared with other games in Holodrum and Labrynna makes me think that these must be kind of an alternate dimension. Like, we see people like Malin and Ingo and other people from previous games with the same name and everything who are not Syrup the Witch. They're, I don't think, meant to be the same people because they're in these other lands. And so I think it's supposed to be kind of like a Majora's Mask situation where we're in another world and there's just these people who look like them. This makes it both a little bit easier to fit them in everywhere and a little bit harder to place exactly where, because, of course, also the plot of the game is Koume, if we link them together, Koume and Kotake, the witches, are trying to revive Ganon, and so presumably it would have to be after Ocarina of Time, because Ganon's around and has been killed and needs to be brought back. But Koume and Kotake were also killed in Ocarina of Time, at least in the adult timeline. And so if either these are the same ones and this is on the child timeline, or if these are a different realm and we already have a bunch of different people in here, then they could just be different versions of Koume and Kotake, especially since we've already seen that in Majora's Mask, where the Koume and Kotake in there are pretty friendly. They're not, even though they share the same name, they're definitely not the same people as the versions from Ocarina of Time who were part of the villainous plot. So still going to have to try to think of how those can fit in a bit more. But let's see. Now we're going to go through individual characters and enemies. So I do apologize for anybody traumatized by seeing the Ocarina of Time Great Fairy. Maybe we'll try to block her out if we go through these slides again in the future. But looking at the Great Fairy over time, we can kind of see a bunch of different versions of the Great Fairy. A lot of the earlier ones had antenna and are very much playing off the sort of like Sprite or like Tinkerbell type fairies. And a lot of the 2D games did that, because even in the Oracle's games, they still went back to that. In Link to the Past, the Fairy Queen was kind of, I mean, she wasn't really going for the bug look, but she was still, she seemed like just a bigger version of the other fairies and in very elegant dress and everything. We can also see that in the, let's see, this was Four Swords and this was Minish Cap. The Great Fairies there. This is one of the ones from Minish Cap. Of course, we had the, actually Four Swords might have had the same ones, because we had the yellow butterfly wing one, we had the blue mayfly wing one, and then we had the green dragonfly wing one. But still, you know, they have the elegant dresses, but they also still have very much the bug wings and going off of that kind of theme. Then we had, in Ocarina of Time and Majora's Mask, we had the Great Fairy, who's a bit more, seems almost like a nature spirit type, with, you know, the vines growing all around her. Her hair's like constantly moving, and she's like floating, like there's a wind all about her. Seems very wild. Even the parts about her that seem unsettling, like the cackling laugh and everything, it just makes her seem very wild and, you know, fits with the nature spirit idea. And then we had in Wind Waker our probably the most alien-looking fairies, where, you know, the normal Great Fairies had 4 arms. They kind of had a metallic sheen, no legs. They just kind of trail off. It was also used in Four Swords Adventure. And the Fairy Queen had, you know, actual legs and only 2 arms, but still had the metallic sheen and looking like a child, even though she's the leader of the fairies, and over all of them still added a very much an element of like otherness to them. They seemed very much to fit like the alien feel of fairy. And then that brings us to Twilight Princess, where, interestingly enough, just seems to have gone, doesn't seem to fit with a lot of the other ones. I think of the ones we've seen, I think she's closest to the Ocarina of Time Great Fairy. Just the you know, the sparse clothing, the hair doesn't seem like it's, you know, ratty or anything, but it doesn't seem like it's, you know, perfectly styled or anything. She seems much more like a wild spirit, although she still has not quite insect wings, but kind of a suggestion of wings on this kind of aura on her back. So taking a little bit of those traditions as well. And of course, her face is also very much a very youthful face, which seems interesting that we're getting all these different elements and different views of fairies and fairy, the kind of the concept or the realm of fairy throughout the games. So it'll be interesting to see how that goes forward, where they decide to take it. Okay, looking at enemies, have the Armos and the Armos Knights. The Minish Cap one is very similar to the Four Sword Armos Knight, or Armos, which was itself kind of based on the earliest ones. The only main difference between this one and the Four Sword is it had the little stairs going up so that when we were in Minish form, we could climb in and activate or deactivate them. But the Twilight Princess one is very different. In general, it seems like a lot of the 3D ones have been, instead of just being soldiers that are, soldier statues, they seem to be going more towards they got more stylized and then just became, like, I don't know, it's not looking like an entire soldier, it's looking like mainly a head and then the weapons. This one doesn't even look like it really has a head, just a body with the arms on it. If anything, I think it almost puts me in mind of like a chess piece or something. And this one seems to be following that tradition in that we see the head very prominently and the arms holding the weapons, but then it just kind of has a stump that it's sitting on that it hops around on. Although I don't even think I noticed. Is this like a little face on its hat here? Like 2 eyes and a mouth. Not sure what to do with that, but this is one case where we can definitely see the 2D Zeldas and the 3D Zeldas are kind of developing along different lines and seem to be kind of sticking within those lines for the most part. BMOS I thought was interesting in that originally, for the first few times we saw the eyes very prominent. It was an eye on a statue in the Link to the Past. It was just a rotating eye in Link's Awakening. In Ocarina of Time, it got very bizarre with the eye on top and then, this giant nose mouth bit and these little stumpy legs. This was, as far as the ones we've seen so far, definitely the most bizarre of the BMOS. But then we started getting in Wind Waker. We had this kind of pedestal with the glowing ball on top and the little laser eye spinning around it. It seems far more mechanical. Like even going back to A Link to the Past, the eye on the statue seemed very much like either a biological eye or something that's meant to look like a biological eye. And this just seems much more like a construct. And that continues when we get to Twilight Princess. And this whole thing this barely even resembles an eye. This whole thing just seems like a pillar of stone that then rotates, and we could easily see this as being, just a mechanical security device as opposed to an actual creature, an enemy that's, actively working against us. Moving on to Bokoblins. We haven't seen Bokoblins very, very much yet, but we're gonna start seeing them in more of the Zelda games. I think we saw in Wind Waker they had kind of started replacing Moblins as the main overworld enemies. In Twilight Princess, of course, the Moblins don't show up at all. We only have Bokoblins as far as the Blins go. Well, Bokoblins and Bulblins. And looking at them, I'm not seeing a huge amount of change other than, their fashion sense. The Bokoblins in Wind Waker, kind of had their little vests and belt, kind of like a nautical piratey look. The Bokoblins in Twilight Princess seem a bit more tribal, and use like some. This guy's got like a crude club or wooden sword or something. And I included Bulblins on the same page, even though they're technically different. I feel like they're probably related somehow because I mean, they're about the right size. They're both blends. I don't know if that really, and yeah, I don't know if blends are really established to all be related, but bokoblins, moblins, miniblins, they all seem like they're similar types of creatures, and so I have to imagine that bulblins are related. They're about the same size, but we can see with the bulblins they aren't they're wearing much more developed armor. I'm not even sure if the horns are supposed to be part of the bulblins or if that's like they put horns on their cap. But they overall seem far more militant and organized, which also makes a certain amount of sense in that King Bulblin, the one that we fought several times, seems to be their leader and seems to be more of a mercenary kind of guy rather than the Bokoblins just being all a big group. So the Bulblins seem to be ones that are more like, okay, yeah, we're fighting for whoever has, for whoever we respect or whoever pays us, rather than just going after, rather than just roaming the countryside going for whoever. So, okay. Bubbles have also been kind of odd. Looking through bubbles throughout the games, we've always kind of had this skull motif. It's a little bit hard to see maybe on the earlier ones because it blends in more, but it definitely became more prominent as we went on. But one of the things I thought was particularly interesting with the Twilight Princess bubble, it's not a completely unique design. We saw in Ocarina of Time the winged skull, but even in Ocarina of Time, it was very much it was usually, if not always, shown within like a colorful cloud with some effect. The bubbles in Twilight Princess, we did have fire ones and ice ones that were shrouded in fire and ice, but we also had some that were just skulls on wings, which is makes me think that now the bubble seems to be less. Initially, it seemed like it was always called that because of this effect around it, and now it's more of just the skull itself is what we're calling a bubble, which seems like a bit of a misnomer now. I'm not sure if the name fits as much, but we're putting more of an emphasis on the skull rather than just being this cloud with a skullish look inside. Choo-choos have been very interesting throughout the series. We had the really doofy one in Majora's Mask. We had the Wind Waker one, which is also kind of how they looked for Minish Cap, and then we have this blob for Twilight Princess, which if we look back, the way the BMOs tended to get more, got more and more simple and less like a silly-looking creature and more like something that could actually exist. It seems like maybe they were trying to go for something more realistic. Of course, we do have like the fantastic look of the bubble here, but even then, I guess maybe they're trying to focus more on the physical elements rather than the mystical. And so for the choo-choos here, instead of giving them silly eyes and a smile, just okay, yep, we need to. Main thing is just a big oozy thing that combines together and kind of flops at Link. Dark Nuts, we do have. They've always been kind of just armored knights. Took a little bit of an odd turn in Wind Waker when they had the kind of dog head or jackal head, but then came back to just being heavily armored knight. And when beat them enough, they'd lose their heavy outer armor, but be able to be much faster and quicker. One of the things I did notice when I was looking up some information is the might recall when we've encountered these guys, I've sometimes flip-flopped on whether to call them Dark Nuts or Iron Knuckles. When I looked at the Japanese, Dark Nut comes from the Japanese name Tatanaku, and in Zelda 2 we had Iron Knuckles, which were called Ayanaku. So the Naku being translated as knuckle or sounding a bit more like nut in Tatanaku makes me think that Iron Knuckles, they did have a different name, but they're much more closely related than they might sound from their English translations, and makes me think that Iron Knuckles are meant to be more of a variant of Dark Nuts rather than a completely different enemy. And of course, this also seems to fit. I didn't grab an image on here, but one of the few other places where we've actually seen Iron Knuckles is Ocarina of Time as a mini boss, where they were heavily armored, and as we hit them, their armor would fall off and they'd get faster, which seems like that was kind of the inspiration for the Twilight Princess Dark Nut. And so it seems like this is something we'll see with a couple other enemies. It seems like this is kind of the blending, finally kind of bringing the Iron Knuckle back into the Dark Nut line and saying, okay, yep, we're just going to have the one moving forward. And I don't think there's... I'm not certain, but I don't think we have any more Iron Knuckle enemies in the rest of the Zelda series. Although, since the series is still ongoing, who knows what future games could bring. Deku Babas, there's not really much to say here. They haven't changed much other than getting a big silly tongue, which I think they kind of got from the Boku Babas in Wind Waker, which they're technically considered a separate species, I guess, but I think they're pretty much the same other than just the fact that the Boku Babas leave their pod behind. They definitely seem like they're related. See, the Floor Masters and Wall Masters have always been pretty much the same enemy. There isn't a lot that we've seen throughout the series, although initially they were kind of disembodied hands that seemed like they were, a severed hand. In Wind Waker, they ended up being the these kind of very ghostly looking hands from an inky blackness. And then in, I think this was Four Swords Adventures, we actually had both styles. The Floor Masters being the inky hand version that would pop out of a hole in the ground, and the Wall Masters being the severed hand that would drop from the ceiling. No, it didn't. This wasn't Twilight Princess. This was Minish Cap. We've sort of mixed both. We have the severed hand design for both Wall Masters and Floor Masters. Or the severed hand look. They're not attached to anything, but we kind of have the black with bright highlights of the Wind Waker version. Red for, I believe these were the Wall Masters were red and the Floor Masters were blue, which also has been consistent in other games that have had both, specifically the Oracle's games. I believe the Floor Masters were blue and the Wall Masters were red. Gibdo and the Redead were interesting. I combined them together because when we encountered this guy in Twilight Princess, I thought he was a Redead because the main feature about him was when we fought him, he would let out a terrific scream and would be frozen in place, and he didn't jump on us and latch onto us to try to attack us like the other Redead have, but he did freeze us in place until he could swing his sword, and if we were particularly lucky, we might have a fraction of a second to try to dodge before then. But when I actually looked him up, he's supposed to be a Gibdo, and looking at him, you can definitely see the skeletal wrappings. Um, and looking at the Gibdo throughout the series, he's actually, most of the Gibdo throughout the series have not been particularly horrific. I mean, we have, obviously it's a moving mummy, and the idea of a moving mummy can be kind of scary. But visually they haven't been absolutely terrifying. Even the one from Ocarina of Time and Majora's Mask. It's like, okay, yeah, it's not particularly horrible to look at. Whereas this guy, he's got the rotten teeth, he's got the eyes kind of glowing out, very much more of a, unsettling even to just see, which is actually more along the lines of the Redead. And this is also kind of when I realized something about video games in general as we move through the from the old ones to the newer ones, how much in the older ones you couldn't really, well, it's not that you couldn't. Most games didn't have a way to, or most games didn't try to make you afraid of, to actually like feel fear or something from seeing an image. Like maybe you might worry if you know its effect and like, oh, I don't want to suffer that effect. But like seeing this little cartoony looking mummy, nobody's going to see that and just automatically, pull back in disgust or terror or anything. This could be unsettling just even seeing it. So in some ways that can help and it does help with immersion in the game a bit, but it is a very different effect from the type of effect you have when you're using simpler graphics, and it's more just not making the player afraid, but making the player imagine that they're afraid. So, I will be interested to see. I don't recall, but moving forward, I wonder if we'll be seeing any more Redead, or if this is a sign that Gibdo are kind of taking over, and maybe we'll just see a combination of the two. Helmasaur have been pretty standard throughout. Of course, see much more detailed in Twilight Princess, and in Four Swords Adventures and Minish Cap, it looked like they only had 2 legs. But for the most part, they're pretty much the same. I did include the hop loop because according to the Zelda wiki, where I'm pulling a lot of these images, hop loop is supposed to be kind of the same design, or the same type of creature. And I guess I can see that. It has the iron, or the metal faceplate. It's vulnerable from the rear, but invulnerable from the front, and will charge at us. One thing I read that I don't think we actually tried in the game, or at least I don't recall trying it, and actually kind of want to go back and play Majora's Mask just to try it now. But apparently, the face mask of Hip Loop can also be pulled off with the hook shot, just as the Helmasaur can. And we also had in the Game Boy games, it was called Iron Mask, but I'm less concerned about that distinction because these seem like they're very much the same, or very similar creatures. That seems like that's more of just we hadn't nailed down exactly what we wanted to call them yet. Maybe kind of similar to the Dark Nut and Iron Knuckle distinction earlier. But Hip Loop did seem strange because all the rest of these seem more reptilian kind of, and Hiploop is very much like insect looking. But guessing moving forward, we'll probably be seeing more of this type of design, or this one in the 2Ds, because it seems like we've kind of established a pretty good, pretty solid look there. Keese, or Ache as they were for some reason called in Zelda 2, have been pretty consistently normal bat looking for most of the series, which is why it was rather surprising in Twilight Princess when I saw the picture, or saw the render here, and it has this giant like bone or metal hook on its tail. Like in the rest of the series, they all look, it looks like very standard bats, or cartoony looking bat, or simplified looking bats. But it's very much just like, yeah, that could be a normal bat. Here they made it look a little bit monstrous, and this is particularly interesting because in some of the previous enemies, like the Beamos and the Choo Choos, we saw Twilight Princess trying to simplify it and make it look a little bit more natural, I guess. And here they went out of their way to make it look more unnatural. So that's another thing we'll be keeping an eye on through the series of. I do think some of the later games make Keese look even less or even more monstrous, but we'll see how that progresses as we play the games. And at some point in the future, not going to do it on one of these videos just between games, but it might be fun to do a deep dive of like each enemy, or maybe a series of videos on the enemies, and especially where we have different names, see if we can look into like why were Keese called Aches in one game. And I looked it up briefly, at least as much, see that the Japanese names, they were called, even in the Japanese version, they were called Keese in the original and Ache in the second game, so it wasn't just like a translation issue. It was they actually did distinguish them even back then, or even in the Japanese version. Levers have been pretty consistent as far as the overall shape and the four blade bits, although we have seen in what was that, Link to the Past and either Four Swords or Four Sword Adventures, they have more of a flowery look to them. And when we look at Minish Cap and Twilight Princess, we see Minish Cap goes very much like this. Barely looks like I mean it resembles some of the earlier versions, but this barely looks like a living creature at all. It almost looks fully mechanical, with the gray here looking like it could be metal, with metal spikes and red bits here. Whereas in Twilight Princess, they kind of went the opposite and seem to go more with the flowery looking designs of, like, this looks very much like a plant almost, with these bits sticking up, and then maybe this, like, these don't look metallic at all. They look like stone more than anything, which is not plant, of course, but looks like it could have been absorbed by the plant, or maybe plant somehow grows, incorporates minerals into its growth. It still seems like that's more of a I wonder if it's just maybe there's not a particular design they're pushing the stuff in Twilight Princess, but maybe they're just thinking more about how these monsters exist in the world, what their role is, and just try to think more of how they could be. I'm not sure what we do with the hook tail on the Keese, with that, like how that contributes to that. But it seems like they're just trying to make sure that rather than just plopping some monsters down and saying, okay, yep, we'll throw these here, it's like, okay, let's try to have it look like it's part of the world a bit more, which I can appreciate that, and hopefully we'll be able to see more of that as we move on in the games. Lizalfos, Dynalfos, really not much to say on these guys. I think we've only seen them in a couple games, and initially they were, I think these are from Ocarina of Time or Majora's Mask. I mean, they're from those two. I don't know if they were both in both of them or if some. They seem to be connected, except the Dynalfos I think are a little bit better armored, not just with their normal armor, but I think their like skin is supposed to be tougher as well. Lizalfos, not quite so heavily armored, but still decent. Uh, these are not just like creatures. They're an actual peoples in the game, which I do think the foes here, or maybe the elfos, indicates that, because we do see some other creatures like stalfos and things that seem to be like their own people group. And again, I'm not sure how that differentiates them from Blins, but there definitely seem to be two different types of groups for like the more humanish monsters, or perhaps more sentient enemies would be a better way to put it. Moblins did not appear at all in Twilight Princess. In Minish Cap, they took the Four Swords and Wind Waker design, and again seem to be. It's interesting how in the original game, Moblins were kind of just a standard enemy. In a lot of the earlier games, and even in some of the 2D games, they're still that way. But starting in Ocarina of Time, we started seeing them as bigger enemies that are used less often and are more prominent. And in Minish Cap, we didn't see Bokoblins take over their role, although we certainly did in Twilight Princess, where the Moblins don't appear at all. But even in Minish Cap, we had the I didn't add a slide for them, but the Keatons, the kind of fox-headed bandit-looking ones, seemed to be kind of the simpler enemies that were around, and Moblins were a little bit rarer and a bit tougher to fight when we did encounter them. Also, unfortunately for them, they lost their ability to just use spears and fire them whenever they want, and now they have to choose whether they want to be spear-wielding Moblins or bow-wielding Moblins that shoot arrows. Even though they don't get to just do both on demand anymore. Octoroks have been present throughout the series, and for most of the games, they seem to be pretty much the same, although in the 3D games, they took a very different look. In the 2D games, they're all have similar design. Four-legged, I think, for the most part, although it looks like maybe the ones on the original Nintendo, in the original Legend of Zelda, had more legs. Almost wonder if it was supposed to be 8, given the name. And big eyes, big snout, shoots rocks. On the 3D ones, they took more of an octopus look, and still, I guess, very much a focus on the the eyes and the snout and the shooting rocks, but they just look a bit different, being aquatic. Like these look fully aquatic rather than these looking, completely terrestrial or possibly amphibious. In Twilight Princess, we didn't have Octoroks, which I don't seem to have one for Four Swords Adventure, so I'd have to check and see. I don't remember if we had Octoroks in Four Sword Adventures, but I remember at least in Wind Waker, when we were looking at the figurines and we had an Octorok figurine, it said that Octoroks had been in every single Zelda game to date. Not sure if Four Swords Adventures had it. Minish Cap definitely did. And so it's interesting that they weren't included in Twilight Princess, making it that if they were in Four Sword Adventures, then Twilight Princess would be the first game that they weren't actually in. But I did include this Toad Poly just because it seemed to serve kind of the same purpose, which makes it even stranger that Octoroks weren't included, especially since the Toad Poly was you would kind of sit in the water, pop up, and spit out. I forget if he spat rocks or water at us, but he spat something at us. It's exactly what the Octoroks did, and being a 3D Zelda game, they probably would have been using the uh, more aquatic Octoroks anyway, so I'm not really sure why they made a brand new enemy instead of using one that's been a series staple. Poe and Genie, not sure, still not sure how to pronounce that. Should probably look that up at some point. I put them on the same slide, although they've definitely developed along very different lines. Genie was in the original game, and original game, Link's Awakening, Oracle's games, Four Swords, Four Sword Adventures, and then Minish Cap. And we can see all of them have a single eye. A lot of them have prominent tongue, not all of them, and very much fit with the kind of traditional Halloween costume ghost, stick a sheet over my head and just shout boo kind of look. The shape changes a little bit, but they all kind of have that same simplicity to them. The Poe, I think first of all, one of the things that distinguishes the Poe from the Genie is that Poe all have lanterns, and I think in some cases we're told that they carry souls in the lanterns. I think sometimes it's their own soul, sometimes it's maybe the souls of victims or something. They all have this lantern. In the first game, and in Oracles, which I think is the only game so far that has had Poes and Genies together, one of the Oracles games, they still seem to follow kind of the same design as the others. I mean, one from Oracle is very simplistic. He just has two eyes and is carrying a lantern, and that's his only real difference, and is not sticking his tongue out. Link to the Past was a little bit more complex, but still just looked kind of like a moving sheet. Ocarina of Time, we started getting more. It had like older clothing on it. It still looked like it was something draped over it, but it looked like maybe it was clothes it had worn in life or something similar. It was starting to get a little bit more so. The ones from Wind Waker had I just realized with them wearing these different color like jumpsuit things, they kind of look like the Tingle Brothers if they wore masks. Don't think that's necessarily what they were going for, but it definitely makes them like in here they don't even really look ghostly as much. I mean, other than I think they could still turn like transparent and disappear at times, but as far as their look, they didn't look as much like ghosts. And then in Twilight Princess, these look very not just ghostly, but Reaper-ish. Have the sickle here, and kind of the rather disturbing stitched up face, and then here I think it's hard to tell with him tilting his head back like that, but I think it's kind of a skullish face, and the robes make him look very much like a Reaper, and seem to add a different dimension to the soul lanterns that he's carrying along with him. I mean, in I suppose to these guys that even when they're enemies, they still look kind of silly, and still the same basic ghost shape. Skulltulas have not appeared much, but it was interesting to see them return and see the skull go from, like, in Ocarina of Time, the skull almost seemed like a hard shell on its back. Here it's just coloring on its back. And I know in Ocarina of Time it was always meant to be like, this is the Skulltula's head and this is just markings on its back. But I still felt like anytime I encountered them in Ocarina of Time and Majora's Mask, it felt like this is their face. Because you can't really see their head at all unless, I think maybe if you're really close you might be able to see it, but most of the time you're just wanting to fight them. You're not going to be spending time looking at that. Here, it's much clearer that they have an actual spider face on their head, and that the skulls are just a pattern on its back, not actually how it's seeing. So I don't know if Skulltulas will appear too much more in the series, but it's been interesting seeing that much of a change already. Style foes, again, we have the foes portion. Seem to have pretty much developed along pretty standard lines. Initially, they had the two swords and did fighting in Zelda 2 with the sword and shield. It seems like in the 2D Zeldas, they've mostly gone away from the weapon fighting into just being, try to jump at Link or hit him with their claws or throw their heads at Link. Whereas the 3D Zeldas have stuck quite a bit more to the style foes as actual fighting soldiers. With the armor and using actual weapons. And again, we have foes as part of their name, seeming to indicate that they're a people, which, on the one hand, might seem a little bit odd that the skeletons would be their own race or their own people or something, because it's like, yeah, they might have been somebody in life, but now they're dead and been reanimated. But what gives me a little pause on that is in Majora's Mask, in Ikana Valley, we saw the king and his two bodyguards who were Stalfos and still had personality and everything despite having been dead for a long time. So makes me think that these guys might not, they're animated somehow and they are long past their expiration date, but that there might be something more to it than just like some magic making them fight, that they might still have some amount of personality or something to it. Maybe that's why they're all using weapons still. And I think I noticed on this guy's shield, almost looks like I think that's just a design on his shield, but it almost looks like, bony fingers reaching through the shield and holding it on the front side. Style Child, we haven't encountered as often. Mainly these were just the guys that would appear in little swarms in Twilight Princess. Getting a little better look at them. Interestingly enough, the spears, I understand it. I'm not really sure what's going on with this gauntlet they'll have on their left hand. Although the Style Child from, I think this was Four Swords, maybe Four Swords Adventures, also has kind of yellowish hands, which either those are supposed to be its claws, because we see kind of different colored claws on the one from here, or maybe it's wearing some kind of gauntlet as well. My main thing is I'm not really sure how these how these are related to Stalfos. Are the Stal Child, is that supposed to indicate that these are like the skeletons of children who died as opposed to adults? Because that would be kind of disturbing, thinking of um, all these child skeletons brought back and forced to fight. Or is this just a classification thing that people are like, okay, these skeletons are smaller, so we'll call them Stal Child instead of Stalfos? Not sure. I'm not. One of the frustrating things about this is in a lot of cases, I'm not sure that we really can get answers to any of these, unless we, if I get around to doing some videos on individual monsters and stuff, I'll try doing a deeper dive into some of the other sources and stuff Nintendo said over the years. But unless they've addressed it specifically, it's probably not something we're going to see much more information on. Tektites have been rather interesting in that their design, it's just interesting how much their design has stayed the same. It's always been one eye, four legs, with the exception of Adventure of Link, Zelda 2, where they seem to have 6 legs for some reason. But in all the others, they seem to have 4, assuming that the ones here where we only see 2 legs were meant to just assume that it has legs behind it because we're seeing it head on. Not really too much to say there, because they seem to have found a design they liked and just sticking to it. Wizrobes. Did not get a Wizrobe in Twilight Princess, which a little bit disappointing. I think would have been interested to see how what they might have done with Wizrobes in Twilight Princess. But in the 2D games, they've mostly stayed the same. They've gotten a little bit more elaborate in like Four Swords and Minish Cap, but it's always been kind of this hooded mage that you can't really see his face, in either full robes or a hat and robes. Seem to have gone more with the hat and robes in most of the games. Maybe maybe these look just a little bit odd. I guess maybe it helps them look more magical. Maybe they don't want to. Sorry, this bit on the front, little cross on the front. I just now realized looking at this, it almost looks like a mouth. And definitely on the other ones, on some of them, these two, it actually looks like they just made it almost like shading or wrinkles in the clothes. Doesn't even look like it's necessarily any design. On these, they definitely made it more of like some kind of design or crest on them. But the 2D Zeldas have kept that same basic design, just kind of worked with it. The 3D Zeldas have kind of been going off on their own. In Ocarina of Time and Majora's Mask, not even sure if there was one in both games, but whichever games had it, they went with an old man wielding a staff kind of design, and didn't have robes covering him. Had just a very goofy looking face. And then of course in Wind Waker they went with the kind of toucan Sam look and a wand. And so I'll be interested to see as we see some more whether that continues with the 2D Zeldas and 3D Zeldas. Where are we going with these designs? Because there's no consistency on the 3D here. We're just going with some off the wall stuff, and that's why I wish they would have had one in Twilight Princess. Would have been interested to see, would they got them with something even crazier than a toucan, or would they have gone back to try to make it look more realistic, like a human in robes or something. Wolfos, we haven't seen many. I think I just wanted to mention this because this was another case of Twilight Princess um, taking something that had been more monstrous. In this case, the Wolfos from, I think this was Majora's Mask, actually, the White Wolfos. Might have been Ocarina of Time as well, in the Ice Cavern. But there they walked around on two legs, and kind of fought by swinging their claws at us. They could run on four legs, but they'd get up on two legs to fight. And in Twilight Princess, they just run around on four legs and look like just kind of a big scary wolf. They'd leap at us and taking something that seemed more like almost like a werewolf kind of thing, and turning it into more just a regular animal, just one that's ferocious. So I think that's it for the normal enemies, and it's definitely interesting to see that overall they're in Twilight Princess at least they've been trying to go for more. I would have to say more of a natural look for the enemies, and seem to be thinking a bit more about how they fit into the world, how their what their role is, how they might exist, and making some of the more animalistic ones look more animal-like. Whereas the 2D Zeldas seem like they're going more with like, yeah, we'll keep following the traditions from before because that's what people are familiar with, and what people are expecting in a 2D Zelda sprite. So looking at Vaati from Minish Cap, well, we had Four Swords Vaati and Four Swords Adventure Vaati in his ball form, and he did do some transforming and stuff. But this was kind of his, how he was introduced to us, and most of kind of his standard form in those games. In Minish Cap, we got to see kind of how he got there. He started. I didn't actually get full Minish Vaati before he got the Minish Cap. But he looked like a normal Minish. Got the Minish Cap and then took on more of a Hylian look, which helped him kind of pass as a Hylian for the purposes of being able to get close to the king and be able to enact his plan. Once he got enough power, he became I'm forgetting the names of these forms, but he first became like a mage form, and if you don't remember, here he looks just kind of like a mage. You have his head on top of a long, taller body, but there was also like a big eye on his chest, which seemed to indicate that this was more than just him hitting a growth spurt. Then he became this form where the eye becomes more prominent, and he kind of has the like eyeballs surrounding him and guarding him that we had to hit, be able to get him. And then he had his final form, where even those are kind of not as prominent. It's mainly the big single body, which we can see from his previous forms. The spike on top and the round bit here, and then just kind of the long arms that didn't usually have on here, except for maybe at some point during the fight he might have grown them. So it's kind of interesting to see the progression there. It almost also kind of makes me wonder if this is supposed to be one of the first or one of the earlier Zeldas. Because one of the things we see in a lot of the Zeldas is a lot of the enemies and a lot of the icons and stuff in evil areas have to deal with like a single eye. We mentioned it with the Tektites. They have a single eye. A lot of boss enemies, I think we were kind of poking some fun at it in Twilight Princess, not Twilight Princess, Link to the Past. How many enemies, especially of the bosses, are like a single eye with other eyes around them. And that doesn't fit Ganon or any of Ganon's forms, or Ganondorf in his human form. But if Vaati is supposed to be like if Minish Cap does take place early on, and Vadi is one of the original enemies, and we can see him kind of going into this like just one big eye with little eyes around him. I wonder if like in game, not uh, obviously not in our chronology where the other games came first, but in the Zelda universe, could it be that so many bosses are eyes surrounded by other eyes because they were created by Vadi, or they're trying to copy Vadi, or they were influenced by Vadi in some way? So, I have to see. I have to see if we see other games. If we see any of the other games that definitely take place earlier, we'll have to keep an eye out for that. Skull Kid, I just thought was interesting as a character, just to see him in Ocarina of Time and Majora's Mask. Well, Majora's Mask, he was wearing Majora's Mask, but in Ocarina of Time, his face was completely shadowed. You just saw the two glowing eyes and his mouth. In the remakes, when they brightened it up, you can see that it's very much like a wood texture. Um, Maybe it's meant to be. I think when I was younger, I thought like this might be like a scarecrow texture or something, but that definitely looks more like wood grain rather than like a burlap sack or something. But then in Twilight Princess, like this is not a wooden face. Um, I think the gear around the eye makes me immediately think mechanical, but seems like that's more painted on or something rather than meaning that his face is actually different there or something. But he seems much less of like a. I don't want to say he seems less of a spirit, but he doesn't seem like he's a wooden boy who's dancing around. He seems like he's something else. Actually, these particular eyes kind of put me a little bit in mind of the moon in Majora's Mask when when Skull Kid was making it fall. Also, of course, he has uh, this large grin as opposed to the beak mouth that he had in earlier games. So I guess in the earlier games he might have been like a spirit of some kind. They definitely had some kind of powers, because in Lost Woods, I think we're told that people in Lost Woods who, like anybody who's not a Kokiri who gets lost in the woods, will eventually become a Skull Kid. And um, they have the power to like disappear when people get nearby, and they have some magical ability, but they still seem like they're very much just some kind of a creature. They don't seem to have like too many special abilities beyond what other creatures in the Zelda games have. I mean, with the exception of Skull Kid, who had Majora's Mask, where Majora's Mask was giving him a lot of abilities. Here, I think we only encountered the one Skull Kid, and just his different look and the way that he was able to move around the forest and stuff he was doing makes him seem much more like a singular, like a particular spirit or entity that has much more power. And still kind of keeping he's very mischievous, but at the same time he didn't seem like he was completely like he didn't seem to worry about us being in danger, but at the same time, like once we beat him, he didn't seem like he was I'm swearing vengeance. It was like a hey, thanks for playing with me, and left. And actually, looking under here, these look like earrings on ears, so that's even less like the just round wooden head. And got a leaf cloak on him, so he almost seems like he should be like more of an important spirit, like not a light spirit level or great fairy level, but still something of kind of that, something of kind of that order at least. It seems like maybe he's the Lord of the Lost Woods or something. King Bulblin and Lord Bulbo. I just wanted to put them on here to. I just thought this was a great addition to Twilight Princess, being able to see these guys. Encountering King Bulblin multiple times and still being able to, like at the end, after when he walks off, uh, and finally concedes to us, essentially saying like, "Yeah, I just fight for the strongest side. That's all I've ever known," and with the implication being that, like, okay, yeah, I can see you're stronger than Ganon, so I'm not gonna fight you anymore. Um, when he said that, like I at least didn't feel like, hey, get back here, I need to beat you up some more. It felt like very much a, he'd kind of earned his break from the rivalry. Um, it was interesting to see that, and makes me kind of think King Bulblin might be filling a little bit of a Moblin role, because we have seen in the games before Moblins who are not hostile to Link. Um, we in the original Legend of Zelda, we saw Moblins hidden in holes in the ground that would give Link money just to not betray their secret. In Minish Cap, we actually saw a reference to that when I think was it Percy or Percival something complains there's somebody in his house. We go in and find out that it's actually a Moblin, and he's like, "Oh, here, I'll give you some money. Don't tell anybody." And then he leaves. Um, and then in Wind Waker, there was the uh, Moblin Mo, who was, well, I was gonna say he was in love with Maggie. I'm not sure that's correct. Maggie seemed smitten with Mo. Mo seemed like maybe he was smitten with Maggie, or maybe he just wanted to devour Maggie and she mistook that as love. I don't know. But we have the point is we have seen Moblins that are a bit less hostile. Uh, asterisk in Mo's case. And King Bulblin kind of seems like he inherited a bit of that legacy. And particularly interesting, I think if I go back to the Bokoblins and Bulblins, King Bulblin's face is more, the Bulblins have this rounder face, and at the end of the game, we see King Bulblin actually like give us a smile that doesn't seem menacing. It looks like a genuinely, friendly, respectful smile. And I wonder if maybe that's part of the reason that we have the Bulblins with this rounder face, because that kind of face you can probably more easily pull that off, either a happy friendly smile or a menacing look. Whereas the Bokoblins, I have a hard time seeing, imagining them with like a genuinely friendly smile. I think anything that they did would still come off as very aggressive looking. But I will say I was a little bit disappointed uh, with King Bulblin at the very end of Twilight Princess as we're running through the castle. You might recall there's that portion um, where we're fighting enemies and there's a lot of them, and then the resistance fighters who we've been helping out show up and they help us fight them off, and they're like, "Hey, you keep doing your thing, we'll handle the small guys." I kind of felt like King Bulblin should have showed up and either like called his guys off so there's not so many enemies to fight, or like he and his guys might have been even helped the resistance or something. It seemed like that there would have been a chance for him to come back and be like, "Okay, we're helping you now," but can't have everything, I suppose. Zant, just I just want to take a little bit of a look at his design here. I was just noticing this week how much his helmet I think it's supposed to be kind of chameleonish with the like bulging eyes, kind of looking around, and this tongue curled up in it. But it also looks like it could just be a silly face sticking its tongue out at us. Um, which, if that's the case, mad props to him for going with that look rather than just going all stereotypical. I'm the evil overlord. I have to do lots of like spikes and a death motif or something. Covers up his arms with we can't see his hands here, which I guess usually when I think of that kind of look with sweeping robes and stuff, I'm thinking more of a sorcerer or wizard because if you're trying to use like a weapon, this would get all tangled up. Um, and that fits with Zant. Zant, as I recall, primarily fought us with magic. He didn't. I don't think he was. I don't recall him using like a sword or anything. Had the glowing bits on here, and then it does seem odd. We have like all this impressive looking bit at the top, and then he's like nothing on his pants, and then just like his shoes almost look like just wooden clogs or something. Like it's guess maybe he was very much focused on hey, if you make any statues to me or any of me, just do busts or most at most like waist up. And I guess in fairness, when we did see some kind of statues based on his helmet, it was like just the head and helmet that were coming after us. So I almost wonder if this bit on his collar. We have a single red stone, but we also have like these other drops here. It almost looks like some kind of inversion of the Zora Sapphire or something, but that could be coincidental because there's also some other bits here that might be looking too much into that. Don't really see any other particular iconography or anything. Okay, excuse me. Now we get to Ganon and Ganondorf, who Ganon, if you're unfamiliar, Ganon is the name of his like monstrous form. Ganondorf was his name as when he's in his man form, his Gerudo form. It's what he was called before he became a monster, and it's what he's known as when he's not in monster form. So it's interesting. Ganon in his monstrous form has looked pretty consistent over the years and over the games, and even in Ocarina of Time when he transforms into Ganon for the first time, he's still is kind of upright, wields these swords. It's not his trident, but it I guess actually I'll have to think about that in regards to the timeline, because I think Four Swords Adventure might have been when Ganon got his trident. So, although where I have it, there's no games in the series I think that predate it that have him with a trident. It's just some games on the other path have him with a trident. So he might have gotten it in a different way in those games. But anyway, in Ocarina of Time, he was still fighting with weapons and beast looking, but still very much a sword fighter or weapon fighter. In Twilight Princess, his Ganondorf form hasn't really changed. He's definitely been a bit more active and not been eating quite so much as his Wind Waker form. But I mean, in fairness, his Wind Waker form had just been trapped at the bottom of the ocean for hundreds of years. What else is he going to do? He looks rather similar to his Ocarina of Time human form, but his beast form is like very different. He's not. Yeah, I'm just a bigger, stronger, beast and I fight with weapons. It's when he goes to beast form, it's just like animal rage takes over, and he's on all fours and just trying to charge us and gore us with his tusks. So if we can kind of see a little bit, the pig nose and the tusks are reminiscent of this form, but he doesn't fight like that. And if Twilight Princess is one of the later games in the series, I guess we have seen in some of the other games where it's been mentioned that like when Ganon was brought back, he was like, in this form he was like part mad, or uh, he was only brought back partially. So I wonder if maybe all that time in the Twilight Realm, he was able to keep it together pretty much when he's in human form, but when he goes into beast mode now, it's just like completely lets himself go and completely gives into a feral nature. So I think we'll see a bit more of that moving forward as well, of Ganon in a more animal form. A couple of the enemies I just wanted to look at that I didn't get a chance to see earlier. Unfortunately, they're still 2D models. They're not like 3D ones we can rotate or something. But the chill foes were interesting. Another foes. Ice people, very much like just a stick figure, but kind of a stick figure, and they could regrow this ice spear. They could throw it and then grow a new one. It would usually have to hit them several times before we could break them, and if they had a spear, they'd often use the spear to like stop an attack. The Shadow Beast. Okay, we have. It's interesting. This isn't like one long line here. It's like two worms or something together, but coming at it from like they overlap a little bit. They don't just like each come halfway, and they're not quite symmetrical. The lack of symmetry just seems very odd on this. And initially I was wondering, is this just like is this its actual head, or is this just a mask? Looks like we see these kind of hairy bits out here. Maybe this is just a mask over it. But when we look at the Shadow Kargarok, the flying creature, like its entire head is just this weird flat glowy bit, which makes me think that these shadow, not necessarily the shadow people, the Tweely seem like they the Tweely people seem like they're built mostly like Hylians. They just have the different skin tone. They have the like blues and blacks and grays as opposed to our like browns and pinks, and, peachish color skin tone. But that makes sense for considering that the Tweely were initially people from our world who were banished to the Twilight Realm. But these shadow creatures are like completely different. The heads don't look at all like a traditional head, which makes me wonder if maybe this thing actually is its head. It's not, instead of just being a mask over it. Yeah, I mean, I was going to say, where does it see then? But then I could ask the same question of the Shadow Kargarok. And initially I was wondering if maybe like this is its eye or something, but then like this, most of the one-eyed creatures we've seen, the eye is more glowy or more prominent. So I think that that's just meant to be like it's just some kind of a buckle in the middle of the face, even if this is its face instead of a mask. I'm not sure that that's actually where it sees. And the Deku like I thought was interesting. Why did I include this? We didn't see any likes in Twilight Princess, but we did see the Deku like, which is kind of similar to a like, except that it just stays in one place and it would block our way until we like threw a bomb into it. Um, and it's particularly interesting because the like I didn't have a slide for likes mainly because likes have pretty much stayed the same throughout the series. I mean, there's a little bit of a difference in the 3D ones versus the 2D ones, but we haven't really seen much change or variation. We don't even get like different variants of likes other than in the Four Swords games we saw the Deku or not Deku rupee likes that were just likes that used a rupee as bait to try to get us to go near them. So seeing the Deku like as whether it's a variation of a Deku Baba or whether it's a variation of a um, it's just interesting to see that see that we're getting more of that. And I hope we get some more enemies that are kind of combination enemies or different takes on enemies that have mostly stayed the same. Okay, so now I'm going to be looking at some themes for the games. For Minish Cap, I was thinking the main theme that I could see was symbiosis. It's not that working together has not been a theme in other Zelda games. It absolutely has, but the entire game just seems to revolve around this. That we have the Minish and the Hylians, um, with like the town Minish, actually living among the Hylians and helping out and providing things for them, living all around them, even though the Hylians can't see it. The fusing of kinstones was very much, we were encouraged to fuse kinstones with everybody, and just random people we encounter can help us out, through no other way than just by like we fuse kinstones that cause something to happen. And interestingly enough, this wouldn't have been very noticeable on a single playthrough, but if you play through the game multiple times, some of the kinstone fuses are you have particular people who will always offer uh, the same fusing every game. Especially ones that are required to move forward or that offer the biggest rewards that you want to be able to make sure people have access to. But a lot of them, especially I think some of the heart pieces or especially a lot of rupees and stuff, were just there's so many of them that are random and they can be just about anyone in the game. And if you don't trade with them at that time and you come back later, it might not be them anymore. It might be someone else. So it really could be kind of frustrating, but it was also very much um, encourages you to try to speak to everybody and really help everybody. And most of the people, I think, don't really directly benefit from it, but they think it brings them luck and it brings them some joy, so I guess it's still helping them out a little bit. And then the best example, or at least one of the most obvious examples, I think, is Link and Eslo. That I mean, we've had companions for Link before, and the companions help out. The fairies like Navi and Tattle would help us target things. Midna, helped us jump up to places in wolf form and helped teleport us around. But Eslo, he's not just accompanying us; he's actually part of Link's outfit. Like he's serving as Link's hat, Link's iconic big long green hat. Helps us, when we're well. First of all, he can help us shrink down to the Minish world and back, which very major part of the game. He helps us with when we're jumping off of ledges, and we can use him to float around, which was necessary quite a bit, helping travel around. And he also provided just a lot of funny comments as we went places and did things. And of course, we're helping Eslo because he wants to stop Vadi and break Vadi's curse. So it's kind of a win-win here. And I just contrast with, say, Midna, where there's certainly a partnership there, and we're both teaming up and getting something from it. But with Midna particularly, or with someone like Tattle from Majora's Mask, there's more of a hey, we're kind of forced to work together because we both have like we both have something we want. We can both provide something for each other, so let's work together. Eslo's very much like he's on board with Link, like, hey, this is what you're doing, this is what I'm doing. Great, let's this isn't a reluctant teamwork. This is a we're all in. Let's work together, kid. And so I don't know. This might not be the best, most obvious theme out there, but I think it's the one that most closely fits what we see in the game. And one thing I kind of thought that had occurred to me, not necessarily with Symbiosis, but just looking at this particular image of Minish helping out. This was what was his name? Rem, I think, the shoemaker. Sorry, I have a little bit of a cough today, but we had the Minish helping out, and this is a reference to the story of I think it's by the Brothers Grimm, the Shoemaker and the Elves, or the Elves and the Shoemaker, which very similar to this. There was a shoemaker who would fall asleep, and in the morning, all the leather he had laid out would be already formed into nice, perfect shoes, and he'd go and sell them. And so he learned the valuable lesson that if you just sleep enough, all the work gets done for you. And this seems to be a reference to that, with Minish pretty much doing the same thing. But we've also seen a few other references to known folk tales and fairy tales. In Majora's Mask, we had the Bremen mask, which you might remember looked like kind of a bird mask over the eyes. When we played it, the Kuko chicks would follow us around, and then eventually we were able to grow them into full-grown Kukos, get a heart piece. And the story that the guy told us about it was about how he had acquired it because he was in a band with several animals, including like a dog, a rooster, a donkey, and that was a reference to I think that was also the Brothers Grimm, the Bremen Town musicians, or the musicians from Bremen, about some animals forming a band. It's just they didn't have the organ grinder guy join the band with them in that version. And then one that's been in the Zelda series for a while, at least since A Link to the Past, although we did see it more recently again in Minish Cap, was the woodcutter's axe, or the honest woodcutter, or whatever name it goes by, where a woodcutter is chopping trees with an old axe, and the head of his axe flies off as he's trying to chop a tree, falls into a lake. When he goes to retrieve it, a fairy comes out of the lake and asks, did you drop this gold axe head, or did you drop this silver axe head? And the woodcutter, who doesn't really have time for this, he just wants to get back to his job, says neither, it was just a plain iron or steel axe head. And the fairy says, okay, because you were honest, like, here's your axe head back, and then here's a bunch of money, or maybe she gives him the other two axe heads. She rewards him for his honesty. And we've seen that reference in the Zelda games as well, with a few times we've had where we can throw something into a pool. Usually I think it's the bombs, but there might have been a couple other times where we were throwing something else. Maybe we did the boomerang once. I don't know. And the same thing happens. The fairy comes out, and we say, no, it wasn't a gold or silver bomb. It was regular bombs. And she's like, okay, good. You've heard the story too, so here's a reward. So I bring that up because I think it'd be interesting at some point, maybe once we get closer to the end of the games currently available, um, kind of try to see how many different fairy tales and uh, folk stories are actually pretty much directly referenced in the Legend of Zelda series. Oh, and the Honest Woodcutter, I think, was not the Brothers Grimm. That was actually Aesop, if I remember correctly. So looking at Twilight Princess, some of the themes we had, one of the major ones was light and dark. Pretty obvious. We had Hyrule and the Twilight Realm. We had all the areas that were in shadow, and we had to restore the light to them. But one of the things I thought was particularly interesting is while we have light and dark are not representative of good and evil. Um, because we have someone from the darkness who's good, Midna. Like, even from the beginning, it's not necessarily that she cared about the light world, but she did care about her own people, and she came to care about us in the light world once Zelda sacrificed herself for her, and Midna realized that, oh, okay, you guys really care about me, well, I really care about you too. But even before then, she did have some good intentions for her own people, and even though she was on from the dark world, seems very clearly a good character. On the other hand, we have Ganondorf, who was from the light world and cast into the Twilight Realm. He was not a native there, but he's very clearly evil. And so even though we have light and dark as a theme, they're distinct from, like, we can't just say things that are dark are uh, bad and things that are light are good. The reason that we're trying to restore the light to the shadow areas in Hyrule is not because the darkness is inherently evil or bad in itself. It's because those are light areas, and so they're not supposed to have the darkness. Um, One could imagine if we were in the Twilight Realm with Midna, there could be areas where light infected an area, and we'd be trying to restore the shadow there, maybe. And in fact, in the game, recall at one point we encounter Zant, and Midna tries to stand up to him, but nowhere near ready to do so. And what does he do? He forces her to be in her physical body, but in the light side, in the light world rather than in the shadow world. And that's when we have to get her to Zelda, and Zelda's able to heal her because as good as the light world is for us, it's not good for Midna as a shadow person. And then at the very end of the game, we kind of have, when Midna goes back home and then the mirror breaks, we kind of make the point of, light and dark are kind of two parts of the same coin, and both of them uh, are necessary for each other, and both of them can help each other, but they're also incompatible. The light, the light and shadow can't mix. Where one is, it's going to end up taking over from the other. So kind of, I think that's why Midna made sure to break the mirror, because like, okay, we need to make sure that the light stays in the light world and the shadow stays in the Twilight world. And then another theme, I think this has been one that's really been growing throughout the Zelda series, is camaraderie. Um, it kind of goes along with the symbiosis of Minish Cap. I think this is more like, uh, more like just teaming up and especially a lot of people helping out Link rather than just being full on. We're always working together for mutually beneficial things. I mean, it is mutually beneficial. It is all that, but it just doesn't seem like it's quite the same to me. But we've been seeing through the games, starting with, I think, starting especially in uh, Ocarina of Time, been seeing more of an emphasis on Link getting help from other people and working with others. And this one, we had Midna and I guess also Zelda. We had the monkeys. We had Uku and her people. Well, I guess her people didn't really help out as much, but she and her son, helped out in a lot of the dungeons. We had the Gorons, the Zoras, the Yetis, who, you know, I thought were a very fun addition to the game. Just like even if they weren't, they were kind of just doing their own thing, and we helped out with that. And then they were like, "Yeah, you can take a piece of the mirror and keep it." But I mean, they were just very friendly, and it was nice to be able to help them out, and then keep on, you know, staying friendly with them after that. And then the Resistance, who were particularly interesting in that normally we have people like the Gorons or the Zoras or the Yetis where we come in, there's a problem, we realize it's connected to ours, and we're like, okay, yeah, we'll help you out. The Resistance are like, hey, there's this stuff that's been happening in Hyrule, we're going to investigate it. And when we show up, then they've already kind of taken the initiative and been doing stuff, and then are like, oh, hey, you're here too? Great, we can use your help. Go here and do this, go here and do this. Like, go here and help. I think this woman was investigating. I think that's what led us to the Yetis, because she was like, oh, some creature comes to the Zora area and gets a fish. She's already been investigating that, but we're sent over to help her. This guy was investigating the statues that ended up leading us to the sky area. So it was kind of interesting to see, far removed from the original Zelda, where Link's the only one in Hyrule who's actually doing anything. Now we have other groups that are not just, they don't just have their own problems, they're trying to fix the problem that Link has. And unlike Hylian guards, they're actually pretty competent at it, and just can use could use Link's help to give him a little bit of a boost, and vice versa. Moving on, looking at some humor, I thought it'd be interesting to look at. We've often had humor throughout the series. The humor in Minish Cap, I felt, seemed very much. It very much fit with the tone of the game. We have these bright colors, it's very cartoony, and a lot of it is kind of absurdist humor. Eslo's making comments all the time, it's kind of funny. We had the cows. I just thought it was funny being able to talk to the cows when we're a Minish, and in some cases even like trade kinstones with them. It's not guaranteed, but the cows and Epona the horse, who's drawing the milk cart into Castletown, like you can they're some of those when I mentioned the random kinstone fuses, those are some of the potential partners you can encounter if you talk to them while you're Minish. I mean, the Choo-Choo's, that face itself is kind of silly, and then just seeing a normal enemy, just giant size, as a boss, and the way we beat it is by like sucking up its foot so that it just tips over. It's kind of funny. And then some stuff like, oh, you want to fuse kinstones in this dire time? Well, I can see no harm in it. Or, I am the nearly best swordsman in Hyrule, split blade. And the humor, there's lots of examples of the humor. It's not all like just bust a gut funny, but it's very much in keeping with the tone. The whole game is very lighthearted, very cartoony, and we're seeing this kind of stuff all over the place. What I found more surprising was in Twilight Princess. When we first see the game, we have in addition to the light and dark motif, just the whole style of the game is much darker, more realistic, a bit grungier, maybe. Like we're not seeing the bright, vibrant colors that we did in Minish Cap or in Wind Waker. we're seeing enemies that look really scary, and a lot of people, I think, had been at the time had been like, especially after Wind Waker, were saying we want a darker Zelda game, we want a more serious Zelda game. And so I thought it was interesting that even though the graphics went this way and the art style, we still had a lot of humor in Twilight Princess. And so I think of, Midna's interactions, especially with Wolf Link, the fact that she's like riding Wolf Link as her steed, and often, as we're running around, she'll like kick her heels and stuff, like she's actually trying to get him to go faster and things, or a lot of the stuff she says is kind of teasing him and messing with him. We had King Bulblin riding through town. I wish I could have gotten a video clip, but you know, he's riding through town, encounters Barnes, and just kind of have, King Bulblin turns, lifts up his visor to look at Barnes, and Barnes puts down his visor to, hide his face. Very much just a kind of funny interaction in the middle of. Keep in mind, I think this is this just before, or just after? I think this is just after King Bulblin has kidnapped Colin. So it's kind of a serious event overall, and then Link's gonna turn the corner on Epona and start charging in to save the day, but we still get this little humorous exchange. And then of course Mallow's whole subplot, um, opening his store in Kakariko Village, then deciding he wants to expand into Castletown, and then by the end of the game, like everybody in Castletown is buying Mallow Mart products, and he has his little catchy jingle and makes the guy working there wear a bizarre costume and everything like that. I'm still kind of curious what happened to Mallow Mart when, because Mallow, I believe, was with the other kids when they went back to Ordona Village. So I'm not sure if I'm not sure really what happened there. Presumably, I guess maybe I'm assuming, given Mallow's temperament, or his personality, I doubt he just like gave up the store and did nothing with it. But maybe he's told one of the older Gorons working there, like, okay, you guys can manage the store now. Just send me the profits, or my cut of the profits every month or something. But looking at music throughout the series, it's been interesting to see it, how it's grown from. We started with just magical instruments, where we had the flutes, and then became ocarina style, and this was even the Minish Cap ocarina, where we're playing a song on it, but it seems like it's just the instrument that's important. Like we pick up the instrument and something happens. So it's at least conceivable that no matter what instrument we played, we'd be able to get the same effect. In Link's Awakening, we started getting magical songs. We'd get where the instrument is still magical, like the Ocarina of Time from the game of the same name is clearly meant to be a very important artifact, but we can play all these different songs on it that have different effects. Was the Harp of Ages, same thing. It's a magical artifact, but we can play these different songs for different effects. In Wind Waker, we had the Wind Waker where Link's no longer playing music, he's conducting music. Either Medley and Makar with their instruments when we were helping them through helping them realize their destiny as sages, or even when we're just doing something to playing our normal songs, we can kind of hear a chorus, like the wind itself is singing to Link's conducting. And so the Wind Waker is clearly important there. We're kind of almost back to magical instruments. But then it's not necessarily that Link's playing a song, he's actually getting other people to play songs. and have a magical effect. But then in Twilight Princess, we things kind of change a little bit, because we had the grass whistles, and we also had the go away behind our page selection here, but we had the horse call, which did the same thing as the horse grass, and then we had the hawk grass that could summon hawks. And the fact that it was just this whistling in grass, maybe there's something special about the grass, but it kind of makes it seem like it's just this whistle. The song itself is just what summons Epona or summons the hawk. And this is even more noticeable when we're howling at the stones and to be able to learn our sword skills, where we don't even have an instrument. It's just the wolf is howling. And yes, it's in specific spots, so it's not like it's just anywhere we are the howl works, but we're seeing more of a magical effect of a song. So on this page, I was initially looking at initially looked at this as multiple views. We have had in several games where we see the same place from like different perspective. A Link to the Past, we had Hyrule and we had the Dark World. In Ocarina of Time, we had young Link and adult Link, visiting the same places but seeing how they've changed. Oracle of Ages, we had a much bigger group of time. Oracle of Seasons, we had the different seasons in different places. Wind Waker, we didn't exactly see Drowned, Hyrule, and the surface at, they weren't exactly the same places, but it was like two very different worlds. Minish Cap, we have like the normal overworld, and then we had the shrunk down version where we'd like climb on books and talk to the Minish who were up in the rafters and things. And Twilight Princess, seeing the light and shadow. Initially, I was just thinking that these were different, like seeing two different views of the world, seeing things like that. But in particular with Wind Waker, where it's more we're like entering into the old world with Hyrule, it kind of puts me in mind of also thinking of all the fairy traditions when we were looking at the Great Fairies earlier. It puts me very much in mind of the concept of like entering into fairy and having like fairy, not fairies as the beings, but fairy with a capital F, the like realm where fairies live, where it's perilous for mortals to go. It's not like that's perfectly explains all this, but like the Hyrule and Dark World certainly fits. The Drowned Hyrule of the Long Past kind of fits. Minish Cap, very much we're entering into the Minish world when we shrink down. Light Shadow, the Shadow World, certainly very perilous. And if I were looking at it that way, even Majora's Mask, kind of the repeating the same 3 days again and again, might seem more of a fairyish element. So initially I was just thinking that this was like different views of the same place, but now I'm wondering if it almost seems like we're the Legend of Zelda is literally a fairy tale, or series of fairy tales with between the great fairies themselves and kind of this. Of course, they don't actually say fairy within the game; they're not calling it fairy in that sense, but it seems to fit with it very much. So that'll be another thing to keep looking at as we move forward to some of the other games. See if we still kind of get this other worlds and other views of the world throughout the games. And then, all right, and then this is one that I thought was interesting thinking back on the games as we played them, kind of looking at who Link's romantic interests have been in each game. And one of the reasons I was thinking about this was I think I was discussing with someone online and finding it surprising how in most of the games it's actually not like Zelda's the romantic interest. She is in many of the games, but not as many as you might think. And looking through the series, of course, the original Legend of Zelda, we had Princess Zelda. Just her entire point was she got rid of the Triforce before Ganon could come in and take it, and then called for help, and then she's just kind of at the end like, "Oh, Link, you're the hero. Good job." Zelda 2, it was a different Zelda, but it's still kind of a, "Oh, she's in trouble. Link, go save her." And "Oh, hey, Link, you're my hero." Link to the Past, I was thinking about that one, and I'm not sure that there actually was a romantic interest in there. Of course, Link does save Zelda, but that's early on in the game, and at the end of the game, when we have kind of this, have sort of an epilogue as the credits start playing, there's nothing indicating that Link and Zelda end up together, and they don't really have much of a connection. It's just like, okay, Link's the hero, and then Link goes and puts the Master Sword back in its place because he's defeated evil and he's now ready to move on. And when we see Zelda, it's Zelda's like, oh, her dad wasn't dead, he got better. So I'm not sure if I'd actually put have a romantic interest there. In Link's Awakening, it was, I think, definitely Marin, who, if you recall, is the girl that we established is most likely a seagull in actuality. Which, if that theory is true, would make this the first of what we'll see to be many rather strange loves for Link. And I think this was pretty defensible choice in that she definitely has an interest in Link from the beginning, but not just like she has an interest in that, like, oh hey, you're not from the island, and I'm interested in things that aren't from the island. But they even have kind of a little romantic date on the beach at one point, and she does kind of get the damsel in distress rescue a little bit. So it seems very heavily implied that she's, throughout the course of the game, at the very least, she's interested in Link. Ocarina of Time, then we got the it happened in a couple games, but this game in particular seemed very much of the like just everybody's into Link in this game. We have Saria, who's the childhood friend, and that's not necessarily an absolute given. Childhood friend isn't always romantic interest, but that is enough of a trope, and given what we'll see of everybody else, I think it's safe to say she's at least a candidate. We had Princess Ruto, who ends up engaged to Link through misunderstanding on Link's part when he demands the Zora Sapphire, and he demands it because he's like, hey, we need this to save Hyrule, and she gives it to him. And what Link didn't realize is like, oh yeah, by the way, the Princess of the Ruto, or Princess of the Zoras, only ever gives the Zora Sapphire to the man she's gonna marry. So like her giving it to him was like an engagement essentially, even though Link didn't really understand that. We had Nabooru of the Gerudo, who was at least a little bit flirtatious. When Link was young, she said she's like, oh, help me out when we go into the Spirit Temple, and I'll give you something good. As an adult, after we free her, she's like, okay, instead of fulfilling my promise, I'll give you the I'll help you out as one of the sages. But there's also a line from her saying like, oh, if I'd known what a handsome man you were going to become, then I would have kept my promise back then, implying that maybe she was going to like give him a kiss or go on a date with him or something. and definitely seems to be a little bit of interest there. And Malin, I don't think she ever really gets flirty. This is mostly based on a one of the stones of truth, or Sheikah stones, or whatever they were, says that she's hoping that someday her white knight will come and save her, basically something like that. And the only way that that seems to fit with what she has is keep in mind, when in the adult timeline, or after Link's grown up, uh, Ingo, the farmhand, has taken over the farm, and her dad's been kicked out, and she still kind of has to work on the farm. And so that seems to be the trouble that she's in, that she wants a white knight to save her. And Link's the one who comes and resolves that, and lets her family have the farm again. And she's very grateful. I'm like, oh yeah, I remember you when I was a kid. It's not necessarily completely just, hey, I'm head over heels smitten with you, but it does kind of seem like Link fits the white knight that she's been hoping for. And the other three all end up being sages, which, based on what we've seen in Ocarina of Time, it's unclear if the sages will ever be able to return home, now that they're sages, or if they're kind of just stuck doing the sage thing for the rest of their existence. Which, if that were the case, then that would kind of make Malin probably the romantic winner by default. In Majora's Mask, we didn't quite have as many people flirting with Link himself in his normal form, because he's not quite as young as he was as Child Link, but he's still pretty young. We did have this was the chest game lady, who we had to get through a maze and open up a chest, that she reacts differently depending on what form he's in. If he's in his Zora form, however, she'll kind of flirt with him, be like, "Oh, you're nice and handsome. Here, I'll give you a discount." Normally it's like 20 rupees, and she'll only charge him 5. So definitely seems a bit flirty. Lulu is a bit of an odd case. It's more of a technicality. It's not that she's really into Link, but she actually seemed like she was engaged, or at least going out with, what was his name, Mikau? The Zora that Link is now taking the form of. So it's more of a technicality than actually one of Link's romantic interests, but there's still a connection there. And then Cremia was interesting in that she's a case of it actually going the other way. And I realize I'm a little bit over on time. This is my last slide, so we'll finish this out. Hopefully you can stay with me a little bit. But Cremia, I thought, was an interesting case. We helped her out with opening up the passage to the ranch so that she could make milk deliveries to Clocktown. We accompany her with the ride along with her on the delivery to help protect the milk. And at the end, she's like, "Oh, thank you very much. You're a big helpful, or you're a big help here." She gives us is it the Romani hood? I think the cow mask looking thing, saying this is proof of being an adult, and she gives us a hug. And on the face of it, that doesn't seem like much. Proof of being an adult. Well, we've already seen that with the guards in town when they try to stop us from getting out, and then they see we have a sword and like, "Oh, I'm sorry, I shouldn't treat you like a child." And I think from Cremia's side, that might be all there is to it. What's interesting is after we get that, then we get a message pop up that says, "Oh, you helped Cremia. You feel warm and fuzzy inside. You could get used to this." Right about the time she gives us a hug. So what I find interesting is that's a case of not like one of the characters flirting with Link or being attracted to Link. That seems to actually be a case of Link having a crush on Cremia, which is just kind of interesting given that how much of a blank slate Link usually is emotionally, that we're kind of seeing him having a little, seeing him having a little bit of a crush there. Then we move on to Oracle of Ages, where we had one of the most bizarre incidents in the series, at least so far, where we were engaged to a tree, and then Oracle of Seasons, where we went on a date with Rosa, and on the one hand, it did seem a little bit. Not sure there was a major romantic interest there, in that our main purpose for that was to use her key to be able to get into places. But if we played Oracle of Seasons first, then Oracle of Ages, we did meet her in Oracle of Ages, where she said she didn't want to go on a date at that time because she was in the middle of a journey with the theme of independent woman. But she said it in a way that kind of seemed open to the fact, like, oh yeah, if you want to, once I'm done with this, if we meet up again, be happy to go on a date again. So it seemed like maybe there was at least a little bit of interest there. Four Swords and Four Sword Adventures, I think both of them, and Minish Cap, all three of those seem to be maybe kind of setting up Princess Zelda. It, all of them are very much the Zelda as kind of the childhood friend, and again, that's not a definite, but there's not really development of anything else. Just like the way it's set up, it could be that nothing happens, but it also could be like a, hey, okay, we're save the princess, and so if you childhood friends with somebody and you save her from an evil sorcerer trying to destroy the world, I mean, it seems like there at least might be beginnings of a relationship there. Wind Waker, we had Tetra / Princess Zelda, who it's not terribly explicit, but there does seem to be a growing friendship there, and the fact that Link accompanies her and the pirates after the game seems like there's something going on. I also included the Fairy Queen because she does seem to be a little bit flirty and tell Link that, like, oh, you're exactly my type, kind of thing. Might not actually mean anything by it, but also just given the playful nature of fairies, it seems like she might be hinting at something there. And then Twilight Princess just seemed very much. I'm trying to think if anybody else was. Well, Ilya definitely seemed to be the main focus. It seemed like there was very much an Ilya Link kind of thing. They seem to be. It seemed to be kind of like the what do you call it? A small town. Like they have an understanding. Like they're not maybe not actually dating yet or courting or anything, but it seems like kind of a everybody's expecting, like, yeah, once they're old enough, those two are definitely going to be end up together, kind of thing. And I don't think we really see that challenged at all throughout the game. We do get Midna getting a little bit flirty in her, especially once she returns to her non-imp form. She's like, oh, am I so beautiful that you've lost all words? But it doesn't seem like, given everything else that happens, that doesn't seem like she's really trying to hook up with Link. And also, especially the fact that she's been teasing Link the entire game makes it seem like it's more just that. So, be interested to see how this grows as the series progresses. This is more just a fun look at things, and a lot of these are kind of just speculative, or like again, there really wasn't a huge amount of romance in any of the Four Swords games, or flirtation or anything like that, but just kind of speculative on games of how they might end out, based on how they play out, how we might be able to interpret what's going on. And I'll be interested to see if we have any more games where where everybody's just going after Link, like in Ocarina of Time. Although it it still feels interesting. I think that even then, it's mostly that's mostly just all these ladies' feelings towards Link, or finding him attractive and stuff like that. That's not necessarily saying that it's reciprocated and that Link feels the same way towards them. And so far, the only one where we've really seen Link like actually respond like that has been Cremia, where again it seems like it's kind of a one-sided crush just going the other way. But well, and then Ilya, I guess we don't really see a lot of Link's feelings, but it given all the dialogue and everything, and the way other people respond, it seems like we're to understand that uh, it's not exactly a secret that Link and Ilya like each other. I think so. We'll see how this page progresses as the game moves on as well. So with that, we're a little bit over time. Sorry about that, but this was we had a lot to get through, and there was a lot of fun things to look at. So I should be streaming on Friday for Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic 2, and then next week on Monday I should be available, and we'll be starting a new Zelda game. So we won't actually look at the. I'll just pull up the manual just for the reveal here. Not going to look through it right now. We'll look through it on Monday, but we'll be starting The Legend of Zelda Phantom Hourglass for Nintendo DS. And we'll start by looking at the story for it from the manual, and then we'll probably even be well. Yeah, the story's not really long, so we'll should definitely be able to get a chance to actually play the game and get a new game going. So with that, thank you for joining me. Have a good week, and I'll see you all next time. Bye.